Hope everyone's doing well. Welcome to the MAGIA Mindset. Today's guest is a sports agent and the founder of Sports Stars Consulting. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome our guest, Mohsen Salimi Tari. Roll the intro. Mohsen, I know, especially during this 2020 year, it's been a very, very busy year. It has on your plate as an agent, trying to adapt with the transfer windows, player movement, and seeing your own players adapting throughout the unique year it's been. So I truly appreciate you putting in the time and joining the podcast.
Thank you so much, Shawn. I actually appreciate the opportunity to come here. I'm looking forward to it as well. I've saw some of the episodes that you guys run, and I think it's a great concept, and the topics are interesting. So I'm really looking forward to discuss more today.
Great. One of the things I wanted to just jump into right off the bat, as an agent, and we can just talk about you specifically within your own organization as a sports agent in Europe. What are the qualities you look for as a player? What is the age you're looking at? Is it if they're at a certain age, should they have certain key qualities that they should have established? Does resume play a key factor in it? All of those, if you can kind of touch base, what is it that kind of for you, you're like, you know what? He has all we want. We need to take care of this guy right now before someone else gets a hold of him.
Yeah, absolutely. No, good first question. I mean, I think the most important thing as an agent, which is very similar to the job of a football scout or a guy or girl in a club who is responsible for the recruitment, is to know what level you're scouting for, or what level you're actually aiming for, and who. Because that's very important. If I'm looking at a football CV, I need to know that where am I coming from? Am I coming from scouting for the Premier League, or the first tier of Sweden, or the second tier of Iceland or Austria? You see that there's difference, or Iran or Asia. So because each market has different needs and different qualities is necessary there. If you go to Italy and play in the Serie A, it's different from playing in the Premier League. But generally, we try to focus on the sort of first and second tier in Europe. And to do so, we look at the player's CV. We look at, where has the player been in the past? What are the clubs that he's been playing for? What are the academies that he's been playing for? That gives you an understanding of the football education, because that's important. And the football education, where does he come from, or she? And from there, you look at obviously the statistics, or has he been playing, or is there any gaps in the CV? And then you just delve into deeper and deeper. You look at age, you look at the position, as difference between a striker and a right back. And we can talk about that as well, because the right back position is a difficult one compared to left winger, a left-footed player, for example. And then you look at the nationality as well. Where does the player come from? Because there's language and there's culture and things like that. And then obviously the player itself. So how does the player play? There's loads of wingers, strikers, and etc. But what kind of style do they bring? So there's many parameters that we look at. Normally in our agency, we tend to focus at the moment more on players in the first team. So they should have first team experience. And you can say the sort of age group that we prefer, we want to work with, is sort of up to 24, 25, because knowing what the clubs are looking for, most of the clubs that we deal with, they want to have players which they can somehow develop and squeeze out a little bit more and maybe sell to other clubs. So we try to look at the sort of, you can almost say 18 to 25. And then from there, we break it down into obviously the background, the experience, and just the profile itself.
Let's say you're saying 18 to 25. Let's say someone in America wants to go out there, played
Yeah.
university, played second division, not in the MLS, in the USL. He's 26, 27. What is it that he's going to be going up against to kind of, or what is it he has to show to kind of get your attention and your agency's attention?
So what I always put as a rule of thumb is that if there's a player that, to your point, he's 26, so he's above the criteria, then they need to have something extra in their CV or background or style of play, for example. They need to have something that gives them the attention, that gives the club a reason to say, you know what, okay, he is 26, and we would preferably want somebody who's under 24, but this guy or girl got something, so we're going to go for it. We don't care. He's 2 years older, and that can be anything. It can be that he's a striker scoring loads of goals. He's got a certain physical appearance. Sometimes they like players that are tall because of the way they play football, the team itself. It could be that the player comes from a certain football education in the past, and you can tell from the career that he or she has been unlucky, but there's some good references around the player. So if there is a player, in this case 26, 27, what we need to be aware about is that this player would go against players that first of all are domestic already in Europe, might be younger, might have a different profile, might have a stronger statistic profile. So when you put them forward to a club, they might say, okay, but he or she, the player is 26, and why should we invest time, money in bringing a player all the way from the US, which is going to be a cost, instead of taking a player from the third tier or second tier, or whatever, in our own country or a country next to us, with less cost, with less hassle. So these are the things that is also important for players to understand. But I don't judge them. I don't say that why don't you look at these things, because they're so young, they're so busy with taking care of their own career. But these are some of the things and challenges that we as an agent have. We need to understand the club perspective, the player perspective. It's almost like we need to please everybody and sometimes forget about ourselves.
No, that's great. I want to transition away from the player and more into you and the day in, day out of a sports agent. And let's say specifically a sports agent in Europe. What does a day in, day out look for your agency? What are the key qualities that you guys got to be hitting? What are the players you observe? How do you manage all of your players, and how does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it really varies because there's certain things that are ongoing. So, for example, in our agency, we got two top priorities. One is to find players that we can sign and represent, and the other one is making transfers, basically. So this is basically how we then schedule our activities around these two things. So in our agency, we are today 7 people. Well, I'm the director of the agency, and then we got another agent who's based in Finland and covers the Estonian market. And then we got sort of what I call head of recruitment. So we got one in Denmark, one in Austria, one in Iran. I have my partner who's based in Sweden, and our chief scout who's based in the UK. So all of us have basically tasks based on the country that we live in. So for example, we create profiles of what kind of players do we want to go and identify that we can represent, or what kind of profile do we think we can make business with, for example. It could be our own players, but it could be other agents' players, or maybe it's us helping the clubs sell players as well. So the activities is based around those things, and depending on what time of the year it is, some activities might have more focus. So, for example, now we're going into the transfer window, which starts in just a week. So obviously for us now, the focus is more on getting clubs for the players that needs to move this window. So we focus more on positioning them to the right clubs, calling the clubs, having conversations with them, speaking to our partners in other countries or other agencies, helping them as well, because we might not always have the players that we like. But when the window is closed, we look more at, okay, as an agency, we have a target of each year how many players we want to sign up on based on how many people we are, because we don't want to sign loads amount of players, so it's quantity over quality. We can talk more about that as well, but I think it's so important, and this is something I learned during my time so far, that representing a player takes time. It takes a lot of time, and sometimes I think agencies forget that you're going in to represent a player. This is a human being. They need attentions as well. They need to get things explained to them. They got people around them that sometimes need attention. So for those reasons, we are very cautious about who we engage with, because once we do it, we believe fully, and we want to have a long-term, basically, relationship and collaboration with them. So once the window is closed, the focus is more on basically identifying those kind of players, but eventually also looking at the next window and players that we know need to move. So start to promote the market. We're very active on social media. So we, as soon as our players do really well, it can be a good performance, it could be a goal, it could be something that makes them stand out. Immediately we put them out there because we know that people are following us, basically. And it's a great way to position them as well. If we speak specifically about my own day to day, I mean, I wake up, for example, in the morning. I start with some training. I usually do them in the mornings because it's easier to just get it done. And then usually I start my day at 8 o'clock. And you can tell, for me, there's three priorities throughout that I focus on. One is to make sure that our players are fine. In our agency, the people that I mentioned, they also look after the players. So I have weekly meetings with them, and we look at every player. How have they performed? Is everything fine? Do we need to do anything? Things change quite quickly sometimes. And then I look at, for example, the players that we have in our own pipeline. So the players that we'd like to identify and work with. How can we get access to them, for example? We try to have meetings with players which we want to work with. Then it's also a case of clubs constantly having meetings with them at the right time to nurture the relationship, but also make connection with new clubs. So new clubs in new markets, clubs in our own market that we might not have had a chance to engage with. You don't want to just be sending emails and asking them, hey, what are you looking for next window? You want to make it a bit more personal, and the clubs appreciate that. So identifying clubs, nurturing relationships, and in the end, is all about, as an agency, as I said, we make a living by transferring players. So it's all about doing it the right way. So planning ahead, which players do we know needs to move next window? So start to already plan for that in the best way to create the best conditions around that. So this is how the day-to-day can look like. Another element that I want to add is that myself personally, I do a lot of scouting myself. So obviously now with the pandemic, it's been video scouting because we've not been allowed to attend games. So I spend hours during the week to look at players that are being sent to me, either from the boys in the agency or from other partners, or players that I'm interested in myself, basically. So sometimes I start at 8 and I finish 10, 11 in the evening. Sometimes I finish normal hours, and sometimes you spend weekends. But when you're passionate about it, you don't look at the time.
No, I mean, it's so crazy. I mean, recently Jorge Mendes got named sports agent of the century. It's such a crazy way to see how the game has evolved, but how that business and agency side has evolved. Huge. The way how agents are in the front now. They're taking care of a lot of businesses, and it didn't used to be like that. Probably from the beginning, it used to be the player used to negotiate his own deals, and as time evolved, now owners are having difficulty because now there's someone coming in and really taking care of the player, looking at what's in the best interest long term, not just short term, but long term. So I want to kind of get into that.
Yeah,
how
yeah,
how
absolutely.
does someone get started? How did you get started? Because I know when you've set up something good, now you have a base in Sweden, in Iran, in the UK. So you have a good infrastructure set now, but it's not said like that at the beginning stages, the early stages, where it's so difficult from,
Yeah,
if you got to get registered, where is the test got to come from?
yeah,
How do you
yeah.
take that? And then um, how does the agency get set up from there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. My own journey started 2012. I mean, I can share. I used to play football myself. I started when I was like 9 years old. So my background is that I'm from Iran. I was born in Iran, in Tehran, but when I was 2 years old, we moved with the family to Stockholm, Sweden. So I grew up in Stockholm, Sweden. And I always wanted to become a professional footballer, but I choose to say I was never good enough, even though I had a time where I really actually made a plan because I was playing. I was sort of 18, and I was playing in the non-leagues of Sweden, and I've made a plan of actually getting myself to the top, but I just never made it. I was injured or sick or just good enough. And why I mention I'm not good enough because I realize now, from a mentality point of view, mindset point of view, I wasn't disciplined enough. I didn't have those ingredients, and we'll speak more about that as well because I think that's a very important element when we speak about these things. So I therefore went into studying. I always wanted to work in the business, so I studied sports management in a town 2 hours away from Sweden called Örebro, and I did that for about 5 years. And during that time, my interest to become a sports agent or football agent, as they say, grew. And you can say that after my university studies, I tried to get into an agency because that was for me the best way to actually learn the game. So getting into an agency, see how it's done. So the things that you mentioned, because for me, I was only reading newspapers. And I see Mino Ryle on this side, Jonathan Barnett, Paul Mendes, all of these big guys. They're moving this player to that player, but there was so much I didn't know, which I know today. So there's a lot of young people gets in touch with me who wants to join, but I try to break that down to them because being an agent is a very tough lifestyle, and it is a lifestyle that you need to be aware about. So I wanted to learn that, and I was fortunate 2012 to get in touch with an agency in Sweden who were quite established, had about 20, 25 players, and they the agent there helped me a lot. I still know him really well. We're still good friends today, and that was sort of my way into learning the business, looking after the player, being a mentor for the players, dealing with parents, dealing with sort of the players' emotions, promote the players, market the players, the importance of that, the constant promotion and marketing, helping them, getting trials to the biggest stage in the Premier League or Championship, for example, being part of a trial to see what's happening actually, seeing the communication with the club. So all of those elements, you can perhaps say everything apart from the negotiation, which was made, by the agent, but he was kind enough to allow me see the communication of that as well and sort of break it down to, okay, this is what's happening now. When they say this is what they mean. So very fruitful. And those 4 years that I did that was my way in. Now, how you start, that's one way to start, basically, where I advise that if you can, try to join an agency or an agent where you can do some of this work. Maybe you can offload them. Now, that is difficult because I know the agent market it's a still very closed market. It's the information that is inside an agency. People are not so keen to share that because what it is, these guys who've been working for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, they build it up themselves. The knowledge is something that they've learned on the streets, if you like. It's this, you don't find a university education around sports agents, for example, or football agents. So it's almost like you had to pick it up yourself. There's FIFA who put the regulations there. Back in the days, you made an exam, you got a book of like 500 pages, you study, and then you pay the fee, and you're a licensed agent. Nowadays, that's not the way it goes. Nowadays, depending on which country you are, there's a registration process. So in the UK, for example, you have to pay a fee every year, and then you can allow yourself to be called intermediary, because that's the word instead of agent. So football intermediary. If you want to work with youngsters in the UK, you need to do sort of like a background check and pass that one, and then you can work with players under 18. But if you, for example, you go to Italy, there's an exam. For example, if you go to France, there's an exam. If you go to other markets, for example, it might not be an exam. It might not be anything. You just have to sort of declare the transfer with the association once you've done it, for example. So those technicalities is good for anyone to know, like, okay, what's the regulations in my country, depending on whether it's football or whatever sports it is, to learn about them. But then it's all about trying to, get experience. And you can do it by joining an agency or networking by going to conferences. Nowadays, loads of workshops and courses, loads of them. I did, for example, a agent course in a university in London, which is the sort of first accredited one, and they do it now online as well. So that's a great way of just getting your foot into the door. I think it's a great way for them to try to interact, try to basically find other people who might be on the same pathway, and that way it creates ideas. What I wanted to emphasize on is that when they're trying to get a foot into the door, what's important, which I see many people do, and I did it myself, usually you finish uni or you want to get into something, you get in touch and you ask, hey, can I join your agency? This is my CV. I worked here, here, and here. And that's great. That's how we all do it. But I think there's a shift that is happening now, where it's more about, okay, this is who you are, but what can you offer me? What use do I have of bringing you in? That might be difficult, but actually it's not that difficult. If you think about, okay, what am I good at? What can I do? What am I interested in? I'm, for example, very interested in football. I love going to games. And around me are these teams, for example. And around me are these people that I know. So bring that to the table and say, hey, look, I can do scouting for you. Or I can, put you in touch with these people, for example, because I know them. So you offer them some things. And you might not even be looking to get paid, because the experience is more worth than the money. And if you learn how to do things, then you learn how to also make money. So it's more about offering what can you actually offer the agency or the agent that you want to work with in the beginning. That way, at least for me, if someone would come approach me that way, immediately they will get my attention. And if I cannot do anything, I'll probably put them in touch with somebody that I know can.
No, I mean, that's brilliant. I think that's the main thing. It's some people want to get into something and they're doing it for the wrong reasons. It's like, ooh, the money's there in this corporation, I want to get into this, but they're not really passionate about it. Anything that you want to be successful, you really need to be passionate about it. You need to love it, because there are moments in any career you're in, it gets very difficult. And being a sports agent, it's a highly difficult position nonetheless, what you got to do behind the scenes. What I want to get into now is transitioning to first the player mindset, how elite, now that when you're observing a player, I know outside of their technical ability, one of the key components is you got to know if they can mentally take it at that level. Are they mentally tough enough to sacrifice? If it's nutritional, if it's performance, if it's social life, if it's a lifestyle that they want to go into. And then also the mindset of being an elite agent, the time you got to put into that. What is the mindset you got to have because I know Mohsen, the amount of doors you got to knock for players to come and believe in you at the beginning when you're not an established agent, to trust you in those moments can be very challenging. So if we can get into the mindset of the most elite players that you look for, and then also of agents that want to come and work for you, what's the mindset they got to have?
Yeah, no, great questions. I think if we start with the players, I was speaking about it earlier about myself, and I wasn't good enough, and the reason for that is the mindset and mentality is so important. And if I have to point out one thing out of many that I will talk about, is the hunger. You want to see what kind of hunger does the player have. The thrive to the constant thrive to achieve, to learn, to develop, to win in anything they do. Doesn't matter what it is, if it's football or if it's becoming a CEO or whatever they do, it has to be a hunger for something. I think the other part is the discipline, doing the basics over and over again. I was taught, for example, in my previous job, if you do the right things, good things will follow. And how cliche that sounds, it's true. If you look at the big personalities in football, Zlatan Ibrahimovic from Sweden, if you look at Cristiano Ronaldo, Messi, Mbappe, all of these guys, they are very good at the basics. They just keep doing it over and over again because they know how important it is. So they got that discipline. And then they also have the determination. So they want it so much. It's almost like they've got water above their nose all the time when they're playing. I think the last, but maybe even the most important thing is the motivation, the sort of why. And I'll speak more about that as well from an agent point of view. But there has to be a burning desire, a great motive. When you find that, then you realize actually how much you grow from a confidence point of view. And it just, things becomes easier because when you mentally know what you're doing and what you want, you tackle so many things along the way. And similar things is from an agent point of view. If we speak from an agent point of view, it's tough out there. Look, when I got to London in 2014, I realized immediately how tough it is. Like in the English market, I was all competing with proper companies with employees who are looking after different sort of like a normal company with an HR, for example. They got someone looking after sales, someone looking after marketing. And for example, being in Sweden, you don't have that size in agency. You usually just have a few people, maybe one or two scouts, and that's it. But here you got full-time employees. So you can just imagine the competition that you have in front of you and what they can offer and what you can offer. So you really need to be not just hardworking, but smart working, if that makes sense. You need to be creative. You need to find different ways of actually going around it. And at the end of the day, look at it long term, because many people rush. I usually tell players that do not rush it, because every decision that you make is going to impact. And for me, I can do this for another 20, 25, 30 years. A player, if he's lucky, he do it for 10 to 15 years, because it could be injuries, it could be whatever can happen that can put them out. So their decision making needs to be very sharp and clear, but still looking at it long term and not rush. Same thing for me as well as an agent. We have to look at it long term. It's going to take time. So what you invest now is going to sort of come back 3 years from now. But as an agency, you need to be ruthless in some situations. You need to be open to collaborate. I always say, for example, that a striker needs the midfielders and defenders and goalkeepers. It's the same for us. We also need to have people around us. We can't do anything. We can't do everything by our own. When you work in team, it's even proven out there that you achieve greater success and greater results. So it doesn't harm of actually teaming up, whether you do it under one agency name or together with partners. That helps. But the things that I mentioned from a player point of view is exactly the same from an agent point of view. You need to be tough, actually, because if you want to go to the top and play for Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, you just look at the players there. The things that happens outside of the pitch. I know stories. I've heard about stories. Players can be mean to each other. Players can injure each other just to play the next game. I've seen it myself. So it's the same thing for agents. An agent can be working with a player for 10 years, but once that big deal is going to happen, a bigger fish comes in. So you need to be able to, you need to stay prepared. You need to be able to tackle that emotionally. You need to be very strong, because there's many ups and downs for both players and agents and anyone who wants to deal with high elite performance.
No, I mean, it's brilliant how we're touching it, and you're kind of explaining it to us from the perspective of an agent and the day ins, day outs. And some people see it on TV. In today's world, you can see a lot of behind the scenes because everything's on media now.
Yeah.
Where before wasn't.
Exactly.
But everybody's getting access to it, but they still don't see the ruthless part of it. The same way you said how players try to injure each other, same way with agents. Agents are trying to steal that player from the other one, and they don't care what it is. It's just they're trying to sell them whatever they do to kind of have it as their own. It's a dog eat dog world, and it's very difficult. So thank you for touching on that. What I want to get into, I think it's interesting, is what happens in a transfer of a player to a new club.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the most popular questions that I also get quite a lot. And there's many things that happens in a transfer, and I can break it down on a sort of high level because typically as a football fan, before you would read the newspapers. I'm a Manchester United fan, so you look at the newspaper, they're linked with like all of the players in the world, and you're thinking, wait a minute, are they going to go for him? They should go for this player, for example. But what technically happens in a transfer is that normally a club has made their due diligence on a player that they want. They've identified the player early on. It could be a player they followed for years. It could be a player that they've spotted in the last 6 months or so. The better scouting organization they have, then they probably know that player from years before. And so what they've done now is that they identify together with the head coach that this player is good for us. We need that player because the qualities of this player is missing in our team. And with those qualities, we can actually improve. So what happens is that they've scouted the player for months, and they try to not just look at what the player does on the pitch. They look at the elements outside of the pitch, and they try to get references from people around them. How are they as human beings? Social media, you said it yourself, everything is on media right now. So another element that they are scouting is their behaviors on social media. What are they actually posting on their stories? Not just Instagram. I mean, there's loads of things, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever. I mean, it's all sorts of crazy shit out there. So the last thing a player or a club wants is a player who is too expressive in these things, because one error and then the club is in trouble. So they have to even be much more on their toes, for example. So once all of that is sort of secured, then they normally make a contact with the club in order to show their interest and say, hey, we're interested in X player. We would like to know if you're open to make business. They might approach them directly with an offer, or they might sort of ask if they're willing to do business. And that becomes a communication between two clubs, basically, on can they agree on something? Because once they have agreed, then they got permission to actually contact the player and start to sort of negotiate also with the player, who usually, in most cases, have a representative as an agent. And then they sort of go through the agent to start to negotiate on the personal conditions. If there would be a case where the player's contract is due to expire 6 months or less, then they can actually technically approach the player straight away without going to the club first, and just straight away start to negotiate with the representatives. And so there's a lot of back and forth on that. That becomes a commercial discussion, which you can break into, lots of pieces. It can include sponsorship. It can include the players, needs, which is not money or accommodation. It could be that the player has families, members that they want to bring, for example. So there's loads of things that goes back and forth. And then there's a part which is the administrative part, which is paperwork, which means that there needs to be certain documents that both clubs needs from each other. It also needs to be officially in what is called the TMS, or transfer matching system, to officially sort of declare that the transfer has taken place. So all of this happens, but I think every transfer is unique in its own way. You can't point and say this is how a transfer happens. It happens in different ways, and the time scale is what's interesting here. You can look into the newspapers and see that your favorite team has bought this striker, but you wouldn't know that maybe they've been looking at this striker for a year or for months. At the same time, it could also be that they, just had to acquire the player in that short space. But typically, they've known about the player. So that's why I said if a club has a good scouting department, they know about most players, and not just one window ahead, maybe up to 3-4 windows ahead. So they plan, for example, next windows, we know we're going to need this. But then the next window after that, the window after that, I spoke to a club in Norway with their chief scout, and he was saying that we always have 1, 2, 3, 4 options for each position. So if the coach, for example, wants a certain type of player, we have already options for it. So even if we would sell a player in the window, or if another club would buy a player from us, we already have replacement there then. So it's a good example of a club who is one step ahead with their scouting. So it means that when they sell a player, because that can happen sometimes unexpectedly, they can immediately replace that player with another one. And that can happen in the moment, but that can also happen by, communication that has been ongoing for months.
No, I mean, it's crazy, the stuff now that's going on, especially in the transfer windows, the chaos, but the organization that some clubs show and some don't. But I want to kind of touch base on this. Any interesting stories of you had with when you were signing a player, or when a player was going for a trial and something was like laughable, it was a funny story, anything you have during the time?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't say that I've seen anything too crazy so far, which is perhaps a good thing, because I've heard many, things can get really nasty in the world of agency. I mean, I've heard about so there's one of the guys who is working with us now, who looks after the Finnish and Estonian market, and before he was working with us, he was working with another agent, but I know him since a couple of years back. And there was a player that had come, I can't remember exactly from which country, but it was from one of the African countries that they brought him, I think it was. And the player just started to sort of cry during one of the trial sessions. He just break down, and and he told me the coaches were just like in shock. They were like, what's happening with this player? We've never seen something like this. And it was just the player was so uncomfortable with the sort of environment that it was just not the right fit, for example. So they just had to obviously, finish the trial before it even started, and the player had to go back. But I've also heard about stories from other colleagues of mine where players comes there and more or less they just dumped. And I think everyone knows about this, that those kind of stories where players get the chance to come to a club, but actually when it doesn't work out, the agent who took them there, they just leave them there for nothing, without even looking at getting them back. So the players just circling around in a country for itself without any sort of support or help. So it can be really nasty. From our point of view, we've not had any crazy things that happen in that sense. But we have one player in Ukraine, for example, in the highest league, who's an Iranian striker, Shawn Alvari, and he signed for this club in 2019, and he was signed by a coach who had previously played in Real Madrid and AC Milan. He had a quite good career. He played in Greece as well. He wanted him, took him on board. Sadly, he was asked to leave after 4 games, and the club was not convinced about Shahab. So they actually try to get rid of him. And I can understand the club from that point of view, because they felt like, okay, if the new coach doesn't like him and he's on a certain level of money, it's a small club, then we want to try to see if we can find a solution to get rid of the player. But obviously, we just said that we were convinced that he is a good player from our point of view, and the player itself. The player Shahab hadn't played for about 6-7 months, so he obviously needed some time to get back. So we just told them, look, just train with them. Don't even think about anything else. Just train, do your thing. The winter window will come up in a couple of months, so we'll start to speak to some clubs. And we actually had a club in Denmark at the time who were ready to take him on a trial. What happens is that the temporary coach, who was a Ukrainian guy who came on, he was just a temporary. So they got a coach, a Spanish coach who was an assistant coach in Dynamo Kiev. He came, and the funny thing was that Shahab was starting to train really well, and they didn't have any strikers. So he was just forced to play him, and that was his chance. And after that, really is like a Cinderella story. He just played better and better and better. And by end of that last season, he became one of the key players up front. Now the coach left during the summer, and he was actually it was during summer. It was during like sort of spring last year. And the coach, the temporary coach that I told about, the training guy who's been a figure in the club, he took over. But this time, he was giving Shahab the chance. And what is funny is now during these 6 months, the first 6 months of this season, Shahab has absolutely exploded. So he's gone from, being not wanted by the club to now being the player who was voted amongst top 3 of the best players in the Ukrainian league. And in 11 games, 8 goals, 2 assists. And now obviously loads of interest around him. So we'll see what happens this transfer window. But it's a great opportunity even for the club to sell him, a player that was unwanted just a year ago, for example. So it's funny how things can shift sometimes, for example. So again, this is a different type of story, but it is really a crazy world. And going back to what I said before, the emotional levels that you go through. I mean, I think this is just sometimes impossible to deal with it, because one day you can get a great news, and then the other hour you get something that just ruins your whole day. So by end of the week, you have no clue what has happened. You're just standing there like, okay.
That's crazy. I mean, thank you so much for sharing it too. Mohsen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for putting in the time. What I want to kind of flip the things for you to close us out is any projects you have going on, any players that in this transfer window that you're working on and getting, any collaboration work that you're open to sharing. By all means, I want you to have the platform to close us out, and then we go from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's always projects in the pipeline, and I can share it in sort of different categories. One category is that as an agency, so my vision with the agency, Sports Stars Consulting, is to be the most preferred agency. Now, what I mean by that is not necessarily being the best or the most beautiful agency, but be the one that is easy to deal with. It's straightforward. It's no nonsense. You know what you get. And that's not just towards clubs or players. That's also towards people who wants to join us. So one vision in line with that I have developed is that I usually in the beginning, when I was thinking about all of this, I wanted to create an agency which was maybe more about like a small boutique agency where I have my portfolio of players in one market and that's about it. But we've sort of scaled that together with my partner based in Sweden. He goes under the name The Soccer Mentor, great guy. We together in 2018 set out a new plan where we saw there's loads of people out there who wants to join this industry, but they don't necessarily get the chance or the guidance, for example. And we saw that, okay, let's give them a chance, because not everyone wants to become an agent. Some wants to just do the scouting or just looking after the player or the marketing and so on. So we've gone to now trying to actually create an agency that can be local to clubs, players, people in each country. So now, for example, we're looking at some of the Balkan countries where I'm in touch with some people that could be an opening spot to take them on, and they would sort of be working together with us with our agency name there. So there's lots of these things in the pipeline. What I'm always on the lookout, because this also gives a chance to explore the different markets. For example, it can be something that's of interest for the US market, because US market is quite well known. From a player point of view, yeah, we're expecting some transfers to take place this winter window, mainly because players are running out of contract, and also because players have been performing really well. So we know that there's interest in them. So we'll see what happens in this winter window. We're expecting a few deals to take place. We've done one so far in Finland. And then generally always on the outlook of exploring new markets. As I mentioned, the Balkan is one market that we're looking at, for example, at the moment. I had a conversation today about the Greece market, for example, the Greek market. So it's kind of ongoing. I'm also always happy to advise and guide anyone who wants to get into this business, whether you're a player or agent or coach. Because I know to the discussion we had earlier, it's so commercialized right now that anybody has an interest. We always joke about it that there's so many agents out there that probably your neighbor is an agent too.
No, I mean, you hit it. You just said it right there. Thank you so much again, Mohsen.
Thank you so much, Shawn.